Greetings, everyone. It is I, Darth Oblivious, back with you for our second episode of Wretched Hive recap. And what are we going to be talking about today? Well, what's been going on? Well, it's level sync as usual, so we'll be popping into a couple more threads there to review a couple of points now. That we need to reiterate on level sync. We're also going to be talking about not listening to the Raiders. BioWare has it right, or do they? We're also going to be delving into why KOTFE ruined SWTOR, and of course, offering some constructive criticism suggestions instead of dooming and threatening to leave the game. So why don't we get right on with it here? Level sync, yes, we have discussed this ad nauseum. In fact, this has been discussed ad nauseum even before 4.0 hit, as I previously mentioned. As soon as we all learned about level sync and how it was going to work, and of course the underlying current there, the critical story path that gives us the forced enhanced XP for the class and planetary missions. This has been a hot button topic, and one of the things that has really polarized the community into two different camps here for the most part. And of course, we got the camp that doesn't really care, but forum-wise, it's still since September now. Level sync has been the thorn in the community side here, as we have discussed in Awesome Sauce and as we discussed in our first episode here. So let's get on with it, see what else we can discuss about it. Now here, what the heck with level sync? I just returned as a paying player. We may have gone through this thread previously, maybe not. Don't recall. Anyway, here is one of the points still I want to bring up here. Ian Argent. What I've been saying since they announced this, level sync is a tool to allow them to set new content on old planets, iconic planets like Alderaan, Tatooine, Hoth, even, which obviously they have done with the Alliance grind. Even though they said they weren't taking anything away from the players, as soon as you start KOTFE, they take all your companions away. And in order to regain your companions, you must grind, mindless grind. That type of thing that people complained about, that engaged BioWare or pushed BioWare to actually implement the enhanced XP events and the critical story path. Nobody liked grind. It was boring. It was this. It was that. And yet, a big part of the after-story KOTFE experience is mindless, numbing, boring grind. Makes lots of sense, doesn't it? Yes, perfectly lots of sense. Mindless, boring grind. That's what we do for the Alliance system. Brilliant! Brilliant, I say. Again, that shows why a lot. It just goes through to point. There's just some sort of out of touchness, I guess we could say, with BioWare and a lot of people in the community about what's really going on here. I mean, on the one hand, everybody's complaining about, we don't want to do the side missions, this and that. We've done them. They're boring. They're grindy, this and that. We don't want to grind. And yet, what's the end game? It's all frickin' grind. The Alliance system is all frickin' mind-numbing, boring grind. It makes absolutely no sense if you try to look at it in a logical manner. Actually, there are points of it, if you look into it deeper, that do make sense. But regardless, this allows them to set new content. The problem is, and this is what I have mentioned way back when we were starting these discussions about level sync, is that, yeah, it does, but it doesn't really make sense to do it this way. Because, first things first, part of the complaint about people wanting level sync is, well, it stops high-level characters from coming in and one-shotting everything, which obviously, with the implementation of level sync that we see now, makes no difference. People are coming in one-shotting everything on low B planets anyway, if they chose to do it. Obviously, that's not really an issue because it was never really a big complaint or an issue before 4.0, and it really isn't a big issue or complaint now. We've been months into 4.0, haven't seen complaint about high-level characters, mowing down mobs, this and that. Like I said last episode, it's like the only problems I've ever had with completing side quests or finding mobs to kill is when I've got a whole bunch of other people that are the same level as me and on the recommended level for the planet, all doing the same thing in the same area. That's the only time I've ever seen an issue with trying to find bad guys to kill. Never once in the 4.5 years I've been playing this game have I ever had an issue with a high level character, person, what have you, coming in and just killing everything in sight. Neither has anybody I have ever played with in that time. So, a non-issue. But regardless, we're getting off track here. This is what I want to talk about. Well, like I said, it doesn't really make sense because, according to the storyline, which everybody finds so important, story is so vital and important, you can't really have stuff that takes place after KOTFE occurring on planets. So you can't really have new content on old planets because all that's been changed. All that's been wiped out. We've had a third party invade the Republic and the Empire and pretty much waylaid to both those entities, let me say. So to go back to each planet and find them in a state of, no, this never happened-ness, makes absolutely no sense according to the storyline. So, yeah, they could do this, but it actually makes no sense according to the lore that has been now laid out to us, the story that has been laid out to us. So what does make sense? Oh, yes, putting this kind of stuff behind an instanced area or a separate area that is not readily accessible by people who are leveling who have not done the story yet. Therefore, making level sync pointless for this very feature. Because we've already got areas on starter planets, as I recall, Nalhata and not Tython, but Ord-Mantell, where there are sectioned off areas. They're not instance, but they're a little bit sectioned off from the main explorable areas that are actually higher level areas because these areas involve quests for characters that are a higher level, class quests and stuff like that. So they've already done it to where they've added high level content to old planets and done it in such a way that it makes perfect sense without having level sync. So level sync is completely unnecessary for any of this. You create a new area. That makes the most sense in the story and the lore that's been laid out. So, is there anything else? This is terrible. Yes, we know. Who's going to pay for it? Kid, you look at the amounts they've given us after year 2. Doesn't add up to level sync. Is what some vocal people wanted. They got. It's okay, so it wasn't polished and play tested and perfect, but that's what you get on the shoestring budget. That I have to agree with. If every player had ponied up several $100s in cartel coins, there might have been a chance. No, there wouldn't have. That is incorrect. Storm Cutter. Doesn't matter how much you would have paid, it would not have made a difference. And that's the one thing. People say, oh, well, you can't quit the game. You need to keep your subscription, keep paying for the game. That's the only way we'll get new and better content. No, it won't. It's just a way to line EA's pockets more. EA is not going to give this game any bigger budget if we all have a subscription. They're just going to see a bigger return on their current investment, which is basically nil. I mean, all things considered. But the reality is that only subs are paying a regular 50 cents a day. Okay, some people might be spending hundreds on CCs, but it won't go far for a full dev team. Hardly enough for 25 cappuccinos and taxes. Again, one of those straw man arguments that really has no bearing on it. We're not going to get a bunch of new content. The team's been gutted. It's a game that's 4.5 years old at this point. Well, it just turned 4 years old, really. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But, it just turned 4 years old. It's looking aged, in terms of, game span life and stuff like that. Some people say it always looked dated and aged, but regardless, I always thought the graphics looked quite fine for me. But that's a whole nother story. We're not getting a bigger dev team. We're not getting a bigger budget at this point. It's a game that adds to the bottom line. That's about it. If EA can find a way to add more to the bottom line, they will. And they are not going to put out more money in order to more money if they see more money coming in. It's just not going to work. It's just say, okay, we got more of a bigger bottom line coming in. So this is what we're going to have to live with. So buying CCs and buying a sub is not going to improve the content one iota at this point in the game's life. And here's part of the problem with level sync too. Companion can slaughter stuff. So companions have been buffed as well. And let's see what else we've got going on here. Of course, level sync needs an off button. We've discussed this one before. It's gone through and through. I like being able to play a character and still have the content feel relevant. It isn't that challenging either. Well, there we go. Yeah. Roll your eyes at that comment. Yeah, it's just, again, we've already discussed this. Relevant is not an objective thing. Relevancy is subjective. Level sync does not make anything relevant. Not having level sync does not make anything irrelevant. It's all in the eyes of the player. And as we all know, it doesn't make the content challenging either for many other reasons, like we just mentioned, companions for one thing. But, Galactic Hegger, again, brings up a good point. How it would not affect your play unless you chose to turn it off. Leave it on and you would be good to go. There was an ancient creature NPC on the course on Training Center on both fleets who gave away why to keep modules to disable 12x. Why can't we have something similar to disable level sync? And, of course, the critical story path is, I've mentioned previously. Again, these red herring arguments, essentially. Since everything is almost at level and gives world bosses second life since you can't solo them anymore, but it doesn't make them any more relevant. The quests, the alliance grind that requires you to kill world bosses makes them somewhat relevant. Actually, it doesn't make them relevant, it makes them necessary to play. Once that alliance grind is over, they're no longer relevant. So that doesn't really matter. Players are in favor of it. Yes, again, we don't want level sync removed. It's actually, if implemented correctly, again, I have to reiterate, it is implemented horribly here because it doesn't do any of the things that a well-implemented down-leveling system does in other games. It doesn't actually make content more challenging. It doesn't make content more relevant, this and that. This level sync is basically a useless feature. It was a useless waste of time the way it was implemented for BioWare to put it in the game. Boss instance, because yes, I mean, as we've mentioned, there are certain areas where level sync will come in handy, even just to make actual group content, such as the world bosses. We've discussed this ad nauseum. It's been discussed ad nauseum since September, like I've said. Again, I've already talked about how it negatively impacts my leveling. I like control over how fast I level, and I like to be able to tailor my experience from moment to moment, tailor my challenge from moment to moment, from quest to quest, from area to area. Level sync and the critical story path do not do that. Yes, didn't blow through plans to get to endgame. I played the game as advertised and loved every minute of it, to the tune of additional 13 paid character slots in all the cards, tell them what they entail, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, here's a good point. I blame Twitter and the 40 character attention span gaming genre is spawned. Well, it's not necessarily Twitter. I more or less blame the console kiddie generation, as I have called them in the past, in a generic form, not particularly for SWTOR, but Yeah, it's the current attention span, the attention span. It's a societal problem essentially. Twitter's only a part, but this has been going on long before Twitter was a twit thing with twits and people or whatever they're called. So yeah, it's like I said in the last episode. People think this game was grindy before. They have no clue what grind actually means. They need to go back and play some of those old games of the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. That's what grind is. I mean, even the Alliance grind of today isn't all that grindy compared to what actual grind is. The actual games and play experiences that actually gave birth to the grind. So yeah, it's the attention span. It's the TV generation essentially. 30, 40 years ago was the TV generation. Now it's the Twitter generation. So yeah, it's part of the problem. Part of the problem. Pacing in a game is everything. Just like a novel, just like a book, just like a movie. Pacing is very important to having a positive experience. The critical story forcing the critical story path on everyone and forcing level sync as a way to make up for that for everyone is the problem. There it is. Yeah, it helps ensure that quests and mobs do not go gray. Well, that's besides the point. It ensures that you get sufficiently rewarded for them, for still playing through them, but it's still ruining the pace of the game. It's still not making any of this content one iota of a challenge, which I think is discussed here. Again, relevant again, no, it hasn't. Yes, this one. Boss fights can't be taken seriously due to you not being able to one-shot them. No, this is not what the OP is actually talking about. So the OP here, especially the end of chapters where you come back to Starter Planets, this epic moment, the storylines get ruined by this laughable difficulty hack. Even the boss fights can't be taken seriously thanks to this magnificent idea. Kudos to you, BioWare. And Schwarzschild comes up with what he's actually talking about. I think he's referring to bosses at the ends of quest arcs that are so easy that the fight is usually over before the player even realizes it. He or she does have a point, but I would think it has more to do with the crazy amount of experience this game gives players. It is not level sync, really. The fact that you can be level 50 on, say, Hoth is ridiculous and trivializes any fight that should matter. So, it's really not level sync per se. Again, this is a poor implementation of level sync. The fact that it's forced on anyone, but even if that was a non-issue, having it forced on everyone was a non-issue, the fact that it does nothing to change the experience of the game, does nothing to add challenge to the game. So we have all these different elements. We have challenge of the game. We have this enhanced XP that forces you to race to endgame, which, as I believe I've mentioned, basically is the goal of BioWare to get you to endgame because they have locked all future story content behind a paywall. So people playing for story can't get it unless they have a subscription. Now, of course, if you do it the smart way, you wait until a whole block of story is released and then you pay for a month and you get all this stuff for $15. If you really, are smart about it and cannot simply keep your hands off the new stuff. If you must simply feel compelled to play the new stuff, that's the smart way to do it. But that's why, at this point, BioWare wants to rush you to endgame because the best part of the game they've given away for free. So now they've got to figure out how to get money. They have to do it by locking all new story content behind a paywall. And in order for them to get that money sooner rather than later, they've got to rush you through the best part of the game in order to get to that story content. So yes, it's that's the problem right there. The game trivializes and ruins the pacing of the best part of the game. Ancient champions should be Sith Lords that are supposed to be masters of the Force through remaining in your training, yet not one of them can seem to best my Twi'lek slave girl in underwear and cheap blasters. Some strange galaxy we live in, yes. Again, Yeah, but think about it. Even without level sync, it was just easier. Remember doing all the end bosses for the different classes. They didn't change. You face roll through it now, except it's a lower level. They were never difficult or challenging. Again, yeah, the game wasn't overly difficult, but at least before level sync, you had a way to challenge that experience because you weren't gaining 10 levels per frickin' planet and just making the content completely easy to where now you have to jump through hoops and do extraordinary measures just to try to find some measure of challenge to the game. It's much easier to be able to tailor that challenge before level sync and the critical story path was forced upon everybody. But that's that. I mean, again, the same old arguments we've been having since September. It's just, level sync, you get right down to it, level sync is a poorly implemented feature. Very poorly implemented. And everything to do with nerfs, oversimplification, overtuned companions, and overleveling. Yes, again, there's a whole slew of things that Bioware has done that basically have just destroyed the original core experience of this game. Now, in and of itself, a lot of this simplification, companions, and overleveling, the critical story path, level syncing, all this stuff, if it had been implemented logically, would not be an issue. We could still have it and still have the original vanilla experience. But unfortunately, it was basically ramrodded down everybody's throat. And that was completely unnecessary to do. That is essentially the problem. Forcing everybody into this hyperactive, ADHD critical story path, advanced XP, and trying to use level sync as a way to counteract that so you feel rewarded. But ultimately, the ultimate reward in playing a game is the experience, is challenging, not necessarily challenging oneself, but feeling, but that feeling, it's hard to see, just that feeling of accomplishment as you're playing through a game. The forced critical path, it just ruins that feeling, essentially. And level sync does nothing to fix that, because it's not about being rewarded, it's about having a rewarding experience. I think is the key that a lot of people, and obviously Bioware, have completely missed. They missed the point of that. It actually is not being rewarded. Having rewards at the end of a quest is nice, but ultimately, the most important thing about playing a game, about the pacing of a game, about the experience of the game, is having a rewarding experience. And what Bioware did with 4.0 is really take that away from a great many people. Yes, it's great to have this stuff if you're on your upteenth alt and just want to experience certain parts of the game. Yes, I agree that stuff would be good. But the problem is, it was implemented in such a way that it forces everyone into that one group of people who are just playing alts. And not everybody wants to have that experience. That's the problem. So, enough with that. That's level sync. Beating a dead horse, yeah, it's still a hot button topic. We'll probably be revisiting it time and time again. Just briefly, because, like I said, we've been talking about this since September. It's not just level sync. The real underlying issue, like I said, is that critical story path, the enhanced XP. Has really done more damage than I think level sync, even with its current implementation. Again, the implementation could have been a lot better with level sync, but we've had those arguments. We've put the facts out there. We've put the solutions out there. Now it's just up to everybody to actually, discuss the solutions and discuss ways to make it better for everyone. That's the key. So Bioware, you have it right. Don't listen to the raters. Oh yes, JMCA. JMCA. So this guy here, JMCA, rating has been in decline for years. The obvious reality is that participation in ops in this game does not justify the cost. So by focusing on story chapters and more inclusive, smaller scale PvE, there we go. There is much greater potential than trying and failing to get people to play ops. If raiding participation does not increase as a result of 4.0, where all raids were made more accessible, then just write it off and focus on content that people do want to participate in. Let the metrics guide you. Don't listen to an overrepresented vocal minority anymore. That's what got you guys into the revenue decline mess in the first place, listening to raiders over the much larger group of people who wanted story content. Please don't relapse into what you did in Rise of the Hutt Cartel and Shadows of Revan. Now, JMCA makes a couple of good points here, but he's really, really way off base. Raiding has not been in decline for years. Now, is raiding as healthy and as popular as it was back in the quote-unquote good old days? No, obviously not. And that again, is a product of the casualness that society has been gearing towards in our gaming medium. Again, going back to the Twitter attention span, the TV attention span, the console generation attention span. So yes, there has been a paradigm shift in how people play games, but that does not mean rating has been in decline. Now I've said before, again, I think this game would have been much better off if, perhaps at least PvP had been taken off the table. Again, yes, he is correct. PvPers, raiders, are minority groups in the overall gaming community. But as I've also said before, that does not mean they are insignificant, especially when a game has been designed from the ground up to include these elements, however well it's done it. We've had the discussions about watering down your player base and this and that and trying to appease too many people at once. But again, you cannot, even though there are minority groups in the player base, you cannot readily dismiss their importance to games and the gaming community. Now, especially if you're a sub-based game, raiding essentially is the bread and butter. Raiding is what gets people to continue to subscribe and pay month after month. It is that grind. That's how MMOs originally were designed. That's how MMOs survived. That's how you're going to survive with a subscription MMO. You've got to have some sort of repetitive grind within it. Now, that's raids. Now, of course, Bioware has, I think, of course, done raids in a very, in a manner that befits the game. Bioware's story focus, and I think the ops go along with that, especially the flashpoints. You can just play through the flashpoints, you get a very good story experience. Same thing with the operations. There is story to the operations. Now, of course, it's not the class stories, stuff like that, but it does have a comprehensive and interesting pathway that helps to mitigate some of the mindlessness and the boringness of the repetitive nature of the operations. You cannot easily dismiss that. It's still an important part of the game because, again, the game was built from the ground up with it. Whether it's an MMO and whether it's one of these tropes or one of those unwritten, rules in the unwritten rules of how you design an MMO, it's part of the game. You can't easily dismiss it because ultimately, while raiders and hardcore players can tend to be as migratory as people believe that casual players can be. Again, I discussed this in an old Awesome Sauce episode about hardcore and casual and the migratory nature of gamers, and that's really not doing the actual discussion justice by giving these groups such a broad generalization. And if you go watch that Awesome Sauce episode, I don't recall what it is off the top of my head. Of course, I will have a little note along the bottom of me right now as I'm discussing this, with a link to that, and or have the link in the description. But there's a lot of different components to hardcore and casual. You can have a casual player who actually plays ops. Ops is not a hardcore only system. Same with PvP. I'm a casual player. I've played raids in games. I've played PvP in games. But I would not at this point in time consider myself hardcore because of just the nature of my life and stuff like that in terms of how I play my games. So you can't just dismiss raiding as JMC here does as a hardcore element. It's not strictly a hardcore element anymore. So that's part of the problem. Yeah, they're minorities, but the PvPers and raiders are still very important minorities in the player base to the overall health of a game, especially since ops are, like the future story, behind a paywall. And as we know, as has been proven out, as has been stated by BioWare, subscribers are the biggest purchasers in the cartel market. Thereby, even though raiders are a minority player base, they are the subscribers of the game. They are the ones paying money into the cartel market. So you can't dismiss them out of hand because they are a core element to the funding of this game. So that's where JMCA here starts to go wrong. Now, here we have further along in the discussion, if that's true, then why did Rose scare off more paying players than they brought in? Raiding doesn't pay the bills in SWTORs. And, of course, Dizzle Me does, Story does. Paid the bills for a long time, far more than Raiders do. People would rather sub to get legendary player than to operations. That's patently incorrect. People sub in order to play operations. You don't need a sub to get legendary. Exactly. If you're to play complete all 3 chapters for all classes without paying a dime. But you need a pass or sub to do ops and PvP. And of course, he completely dismisses that. You underestimate how much people can't stand the free-to-play and preferred limitations. Regardless, free-to-play and preferred are the biggest bulk of this player base right now. As BioWare even said, they've got, this was a year or two ago, over 1 million active players or something like that. Less than half of that are subscribers. So we're now free to play, and again, as I mentioned last episode, there are certain things that certain people know in the industry. Let me say in the gaming industry at this point. That of course aren't quite general public knowledge, but the general public can sort of infer and this kind of stuff and dig in and through, and if you talk to the right people, you'll get sort of some of the answers. But less than half the population of this game right now are subscribers, active population. So free to play and preferred, whether you like the limitations or not, they are the biggest bulk of the player base. Hence why BioWare is trying these different methods to try to essentially force people into a subscription for future content. So you can't. Rating is still important to this game. It still has story. It's still what people are going to end up subscribing for. Now, what he originally said, of course, was that, listening to the Raiders is what caused this game to fail in the first place. Now, again, that's incorrect. There are many different factors that occurred in the first year of this game's life that caused the game to go the direction it did, that caused the game to lose, 3/4 of the people who were playing this game the first month of its life, essentially. And listening to Raiders certainly was not one of them. Listening to Raiders and going to free to play is what essentially saved this game in the first couple of years of its life. By adding to Endgame, that was the only thing that kept enough people here and subscribing in order to keep the game profitable, even through the free to play transition. Now, free to play, of course, brought on a whole new slew of people and basically saved the game financially. But for how long has Bioware been telling us there would be no new class stories? For years and years now. Do you think those people stuck around? No. And just the very fact, with the KOTFE announcement and this and that, people came back because of the KOTFE announcement. How many people came on the forums and said, hey, I'm back, this and that? A lot of people came back because of the KOTFE announcement. That means a lot of people came back for the story. That means they weren't playing or subscribing before. So who were these people sticking around? It was the PvPers. It was the endgame players. It was the raiders. It was the people playing alts. Those are the people who stuck around. Those are the people who've been funding this game. Not the people who said, I just want class stories and that was it. I mean, that's why we're in the situation we are now. That's why, like JMZ said, read the metrics. Well, we've already discussed in Awesome Sauce, I think Awesome Sauce, and perhaps a little bit last episode, you cannot, metrics can be, it was the Awesome Sauce episode, metrics can be skewed, just like a political poll, to reflect whatever you want it to reflect. And unfortunately, that's why the game is in the state it is in now, is because the metrics have been so skewed by some of the miscues and mistakes that Bioware has made throughout the last 4 years to force people into playing in a certain mode that gives, that of course the metrics are going to read that people aren't raiding or PvPing this and that. PvPing has been neglected for years. So why are people going to still PvP? That's why the metrics show everybody's playing alts and everybody is rushing through content, wanted to rush through content. That's why we got this enhanced XP, critical story path, level sync, and all this. Is because the state of the game forced people into doing those things. That's the problem. So the metrics are unreliable unless you understand why the metrics, the nitty-gritty, the numbers of the metrics show what they show. That's what's been missed by the player base. That's what's been missed by Bioware. It's because the metrics are showing what they're showing is because of what Bioware has done to make the metrics show that, essentially. So, that's just a completely foolish way to look at things. Yes, not telling you, but if you don't see all the story this game already has and don't care for MMO, then don't play an MMO. Again, that's part of the problem. That's one of the biggest reasons. I mean, aside from the content locusts, which that is a group of players that you do have to dismiss. Content locusts will never be satisfied. You have to dismiss them as part of the community, because no game that has been created or ever will be created will be able to, quote unquote, satisfy the playstyle of a content locust. But the game had failed for many different fronts, not the least of which was the mismanaged expectations of the player base. It's the mismanaged expectations of people coming from Star Wars Galaxies who wanted SWG 2.0. The mismanaged expectations of people who wanted KOTOR 3 instead of what Bioware was actually creating. That was a major part of the problem, and that continued to be a problem through the last 4 years. Those were the real problems. Was the raiders were never really a problem. Raiders are a very important part of this game. Raiders, PvPers, and the alt players are essentially what have held this game together for the last 4 years since free to play. So yeah, you know what? Ultimately, to have a well-rounded game, if you're going to include PvP and end game content such as raiding, then yes, you need to listen to the raiders. You need to listen to the PvPers along with the rest, all the other core elements of your player base, and have a reasonable content cadence for all of those elements. Now, as I said when KOTFE was originally announced, I said it was perfect. It was necessary to have a focus on story. And I praise BioWare for what they did for making ops all relevant again. I don't praise them for taking away the options to be able to play the content either vanilla or on level with the new systems. That is a poor implementation, but I do praise them for making it all quote unquote relevant per se, or at least making it to where people can go in and play it and feel they are having a rewarding playthrough experience. So yeah, so raiding has gotten some love, the first few years of the game. Not so much as past years, and obviously PvP even less than that. So yes, you need to listen to PvPers, you need to listen to raiders. They need to have their content because that's what's part of the game. It's how the game was designed. Like it or love it, it's part of the game, so it needs to get as much attention as the story does in order to maintain, the long-term the longevity of the game. Essentially hinges on making sure we have healthy PvP, healthy endgame, aka raids, and a healthy smattering of story in between. So JMCA, while he does have some good points, is just buried in some very misunderstood and misrepresented points that he tries to make. Why I think KOTFE, I think we'll save that for last. Let's do something positive. Well, you know what? Yeah, let's do this one. Why I think KOTFE ruined SWTOR. Swiss Bob. Now, he's got quite a post here, as you can see. I think a lot of the stuff, we have discussed. At the end of each spoiler tag, skippable, why do I play SWTOR in the first place? Love Star Wars. I play SWTOR because it's Star Wars and for the story. Very good. Well, I think this game is ruined. Too long, didn't read. By destroying the Republic, Jedi, Sith, and Empire, our characters' actions, history have been made irrelevant. Indeed, destroying any interest or emotional investment in the game has required over the years. Indeed. So here we go. We're going to discuss part of this story, this whole big, fascinating story. Vitiate and Valkorion being the same person doesn't make sense. Yes, that is part of the reason. Everybody harks on story. It's great to return to the story. Essentially, the story ain't all that great. The story doesn't really make that much sense. Why he put hundreds and hundreds of years into growing Sith Empire if he thought it was a flawed society and better, exponentially more powerful one? No, but similar words, the story makes no sense as it is. I can't say it in a better word. This here, right here, is the key point. I mean, outside of the mistakes BioWare has made in the implementations of some of the mechanics that have come along with Knights of the Fallen Empire, this right here is the crux of the matter outside of the mechanical experience of the game. The story they have presented makes absolutely no freaking sense. No freaking sense. Christ, the prequel trilogy had more logic to it then this Knights of the Fallen Empire overarching, not overarching, but connecting storyline here. It makes absolutely no sense for Vitiate and Valkorion to be the same person. What would have made sense was to keep sense, and sense from a long-term perspective, was make them separate people. Make the Emperor a separate entity from Valkorion. Now you can have perhaps Vitiate, however it's pronounced, the Emperor, influence or aid Valkorion in a bit of a manner. You could have written that to where the Empire and Republic getting destroyed by the Eternal Empires makes sense in that regards. But to have them one and the same person makes absolutely no sense based on the actions of the Emperor up to 4.0, and then all of a sudden, this is out of left field. So right there, I mean, this miraculous story that everybody keeps talking about is complete nonsense, just based on its origins, really. The Meat and Potatoes Part 3. Goodbye, Star Wars. By destroying the Sith and Jedi, the classic light versus dark side story of Star Wars is erased, and the classic Star Wars feeling with it. Yeah, it's still always, I mean, ultimately it gets down, it's still always good versus evil. Obviously, the Eternal Empire, from one perspective is evil. Of course, from the perspective of the Eternal Empire, they're not evil, but, again, the story based as it presented, it's obviously an evil empire because, it was designed to be an evil empire because it was led by the evil emperor. But regardless, classic Star Wars, and in fact the new direction the direction that Disney is taking Star Wars now is light versus dark. And I think that's what, getting off track a bit here, talking about the movies, I think that's what a lot of people miss about Kylo Ren. Now, Kylo Ren seems to be a bad guy that's not liked by a lot of people who went to saw the movie, but that's because they missed the underlying issues and the underlying performance that Adam Driver and the script gave this character. It's very much about light versus dark, and Kylo Ren embodies that within himself, within that character. So yeah, it's light versus dark is the heart of Star Wars right here. And now, why we still have good versus evil in Knights of the Fallen Empire, this component of it, of the light side of the Force versus the dark side of the Force, is lost upon that. The game's too easy. Surprise, surprise, companions are no longer unique. There's no sense of accomplishment in general, and thus the game is neither engaging nor fun. Again, like I've mentioned earlier, a rewarding gameplay experience instead of being simply rewarded for your gameplay. And again, it hits the nail on the head here. It would be one thing if say, easy mode was an option. I believe we discussed Swiss Bob's thread to where, have 3 different modes for the game: easy, normal, and hard. But it would be one thing if this easy mode was an option that people could take, and then we would still have, further modes that make the game challenging, engaging, and fun for people who want those different levels of challenge. But here, and again, mechanically wise, is the crux of the problem. We're basically just watching an interactive movie at this point with the game. The game has really been turned into an interactive movie instead of an actual video game playing experience. SWTOR over for me. No, I'll still be around. I've invested too much to give up on it so suddenly. And here we have the WoW effect, the World of Warcraft effect, I'll call it. Now, for years upon years, people have been saying WoW has been dying, but people keep going back. WoW isn't dying. And they try to gather this up here. It's like this is part of the problem. This is why games won't be dead per se, but it's invested too much right here. This is why WoW has gone on as long as it has. Even according to some people, the hardcore players say it's the dumbification of the game. It's the investment of time. It's the emotional investment that we have while playing a video game. We're emotionally invested in our experiences. So, yeah, so that's part of the problem. So, I mean, the simple solution is just cancel the subscription and stop paying cartel market coins. I mean, above all, aside from quitting the game altogether, which decreases the player base as a point of statement telling BioWare and EA, I don't like how this game is presented. It's not enjoyable. I'm going to stop playing it. You can also do the fact to where, yes, it's free to play and you can get the bulk of the game, the best part of the game, for free. You might as well play it for free and not pay anything, and let BioWare expend their resources on you logging in and using the service and stuff like that without paying for it. Another means of saying, I don't entirely enjoy this, but I've invested too much to just stop at this point in time. Well, everything I wrote is just wrong. Ultimately, I'm not saying the story of SWTOR is destroyed beyond repair. No, of course it's not. I mean, retcons happen all the time. All I'm saying is that I feel BioWare seems to have dug themselves into quite a large hole, and it's going to take a very good plot rope to escape from, and I don't like the look of the plot shovel they are holding. Yeah, I have to agree with that. Again, there's a much better story that could have been presented with the Eternal Empire. Unfortunately, I think that ship has sailed. So we get to the end of it here. Again, BioWare Defender, JMCA, presents the premise that religious cults of the J said only was not that they were ever the strongest. I find this period to be some good, dirty little secret where Jai said they're proven to be incompetent in their ways alone, but have to work together to take down a big bad superpower that manages to show them through adversity what it really takes to maintain control of how the Force is used in the galaxy. It also presents an opportunity for enemies to become allies, perhaps bonds being formed between them, or even an entire historical period. Star Wars or Jai and Sith were just history lessons of a single Force order which transcended both, which is not a part of lore. So again, back to our discussions about canon last episode, another one of the reasons why this game can never be canon at this point. It's just, even though this is such a far back point in history and time, it's just the direction that this is going makes no sense within the lore that we have been presented with, the 7 movies up to date, essentially, and of course the official canon material. So it could have been a good story if the presentation, if the tie-ins were done differently. It could have been a good standalone story that really has nothing to do with lore. It's about good versus evil. But yeah, it does lose some of that element that made Star Wars Star Wars. And finally, let's wrap this up. Constructive criticism and suggestions. Instead of dooming, threatening to leave. Something I can get behind here. As the title suggests, beneath the trees says, there constantly seems to be a lot of people claiming that unless you fix this and that, they will leave and never return. But instead of constantly seeing doom, gloom, and the end of the game, we should instead offer something more constructive than to let our feelings get the better of us. That being said, here are my thoughts and suggestions. Feel free to leave your own on this thread, and let's hope that BioWare reads these indeed. And let's see. New classes, yes, we'll get into that. There was something somebody else here. Here we go. Yes, Ediku. Yes, no, that's not what I wanted. But this here. Many people who are posting these posts have prior attempted constructive criticism, indeed. And that's what gets lost within the community, that there are a great many people here who do post, and like Swiss Bob being one of them, Lord Artemis another one that we've discussed. There are a great many people here who do actually offer a lot of good constructive criticism. Tux is another one. Um, Constructive criticism is rarely replied to as well, unless they created a thread and ask you to post in it. Then they don't really reply. They just say thank you for the input and then go do their own thing, which very frequently does not match the majority of the suggestions. See the recent subscriber rewards. People eventually get frustrated and angry, and so post the I quit post, because essentially money does talk, and that really does hit it on the head there. And Gisalo, another good community member here, brings in pretty much this. Also, Bioware has kind of shown that constructive criticism is of limited use, likely due to reduced staffing. Obviously, they have become quite reactionary. Yes, that is more than obvious. Example, the companion debacle. Before that, the cartel slot machine debacle. They launch OP companions, then weeks later nerf them to where they should have been in the first place. Anyone who's reading the forums at the time in any critical way should have known a segment of the player base would have meltdown over that. There were numerous threads at the time with that, etc., etc. And part of the reason why is so vitriolic and toxic is, as I have previously mentioned, the completely inadequate testing and vetting procedures that Bioware uses for this content. I.e., some of it, again, this KOTFE stuff should have had at least a month-long open beta so the majority of the player base can get their hands on these mechanical changes. Again, it has nothing to do with the story of KOTFE. You lock that off. They did this with Rise of the Hutt Cartel. I don't understand why they didn't keep doing this in the future. Rise of the Hutt Cartel and Galactic Starfighter, those tests were actually properly tested and vetted. Those were decent testing procedures. You had your private beta, then it went to open beta. When it went into open beta, we didn't get the story for Rise of the Hutt Cartel, but we got the changes in mechanics and some of the stuff that didn't relate to the story to be able to test in a proper manner in an open beta. Now that's part of the issue here. And with Shadows of Revan, there were little to no open beta testing periods. You cannot properly test and vet, especially mechanical changes like this and some of the changes that we had previously with the skill trees and stuff like that. You cannot properly test and vet that stuff in the closed beta. You have to have the majority of your player base getting their hands on this stuff for an extended period of time in order to make sure this stuff works the way it's intended to begin with and makes sense for the game. It needs to be properly tested and vetted by the majority of the player base, and then we can say, you know what, this actually doesn't work. It doesn't make sense for the game. It should not even be included, let alone, bug fixes and all that. No, so that's part of the reason for this. But anyway, KOTFE is an addition we waited for. Yes, again, story is what people wanted. Story was the least loved feature of the game, and now, of course, PvP is. But that's a whole different story there, so to speak. The story is great and interesting. Love the characters. That being said, there are critiques since it's being MMO. It would be good if you could play through the story of KOTFE with a friend, even if you're reduced to spectator mode. I agree in part. Yes, it would be great if you could play through your friend in spectator mode now. I mean, there's absolutely no reason to have made this completely solo based. This is an MMO first and foremost. I mean, sure, have the option to be able to play solo, absolutely. But again, everybody's forced down this one path, just like the critical story path, just like level sync, just a lot of this stuff. Everybody's being forced down the path of soloness. And it just makes no sense to do it. You're just hurting the game more by forcing everybody down these linear paths, these small play styles, instead of offering options to everybody to be able to play the content in the manner in which they most enjoy, so they have that rewarding gameplay experience. So yes, I mean, that should be a no-brainer, that you should be able, as you did through the class stories and everything else, have people join you and play through the content. And since level sync has been able everything else, why not implement KOTFE story? Implementing the KOTFE story as well, then the challenge would not vanish if you play with a friend who's already played it. Again, we see that the implementation of level sync has done nothing to enhance any experience of the game. It's basically a system that does nothing to change the overall experience of playing the game, except you're getting rewarded as a leveling player for being vastly over leveled, and again, that's because of the critical story path issues. Story I'd like to return to form, but you miss a golden opportunity to make it class-based. Would be interesting to see the conflicts of KOTFE work in a way that you see characters' point of view and the conflict instead of the character going through the same story. Again, yeah. I mean, it's been clear, it was clear by where he even said so, that we would never get class stories again, and that's holding true to form again. And that's simply because, as another poster here mentioned, money. I mean, money and people, they just don't have the ability to do individual class stories anymore. Now, again, I think it was mentioned either in Rise of the Cartel or Shadows of Revan, there were little tidbits, a quest here and there, I think, that were specifically class-based. Now, they could have done something like that. But again, you see, the crux of Knights of the Fallen Empire was about cutting corners and about cutting costs in development. That's really the impression you get from Knights of the Fallen Empire, is that it's an expansion that obviously shows the developers trying to cut costs and trying to cut corners as much as possible to save money in its development. That's just obvious based on how it came out. So, yeah, it'd be nice, but it's just not going to happen. And for the future, a tiny conversation, general chat would not too far ago in touch. We were musing the possibility of a third faction known as the Underworld, which consists of smugglers and bounty hunters, and would add 2 new classes to the overall story. Well, you're missing the point. We already have a third faction in the Fallen, in the Eternal Empire, I should say. That is our third faction. Don't necessarily need an Underworld faction. Although we sort of got hints of that with Rise of the Hutt Cartel. At that point in time, the cartel is the third faction. So essentially, we could have 4 factions in this game if the budget and the writing ability, I should say, was there. As for the rest of it, it's just like getting all new classes. It just, you can't do it at this point in time. It makes no sense, even if the budget and stuff was there, to add. In fact, he does mention give us 2 new class stories. It's just not there. That is, even for someone such as me who finds the bread and butter of the game to be the class stories, I just don't see that as feasible, even if they had the budget and the time to go back and do 2 new classes from scratch, in the same manner, with the same ability that they did the original 8 class stories. I just don't think it's necessary. I think it would be more beneficial if the time, the budget, and the manpower was there to continue the 8 class stories, as he himself mentions, as we mentioned in the paragraph before. That, I think, would be more beneficial than creating 2 new stuff from scratch that would start on starting planets and this and that. I mean, right now, with the game at the point where it is, it's a 4-year-old game. We don't need to go back to the beginning. We need to expand on what made this game great, which was the 8 individual cast stories. That really should have been the focus, along with, again, making sure PvP remains in a healthy state as well as rating. That would have been the best overall direction for Bioware to go. But again, time and money. And, I think that really gets to the crux of what it is. What's the point? They don't care about constructive criticism. Maybe they care about IM sub posts more. I mean, they do love money, right? Yeah. And Holocron, another good poster here on the forums to follow. I kind of have to agree. The devs mostly could care less about these forums. They only communicate when they absolutely have to, and if they could get away with it, they would probably shut down the forums altogether. The only times the dev interested in their opinions when they make a post listing advice on whatever aspect they are inquiring about. And again, I mentioned this last episode. It's that I don't think it is as much a fault of the devs and the community team, aka Eric Musco, as it is the EA PR marketing arm of the game. Ultimately, over the 4 years this game has been around, its biggest failing, its biggest drawback has been the PR and marketing around the game. A little surprise. And so it does not surprise me in the least to see that this still continues on in areas of the communication, where basically the dev team and the community management team is essentially hamstrung in their ability to communicate properly with the player base. And that's strictly due to EA and the PR and marketing team. Being that. So I can't blame the devs for that. I can't blame Musco for that. But, that's where we're at with that. And hence, again, why the forums are in a state that they are, that we have this wretched hive of scum and villainy that we are discussing on a weekly basis. Been here since the beginning. I've seen literally hundreds of well-constructed, well-written threads with amazing advice, concepts, and ideas. Every thread has ended exactly the same. Nowhere. The devs never comment, implement, or even consider any of those posts. I don't have to agree with that. There have been some things. I mean, interior designing came about from a request of that segment of the player base. A little bit of the SGRA. Again, directly from the player base. So yeah, there are things that have been implemented as a direct result of feedback from the player base. But unfortunately, it's simply not enough. And even for things that are not implemented, there's no comment. There's no reasoning behind why or why not something was implemented, which is just as important as actually implementing something. It's why. I just come out and explain this. This is the direction. This is how we feel it would negatively affect the game. Just an explanation does wonders. So really, the posts like these are nothing but a nice mental exercises at this point. Although one could very much sharpen their debating skills in threads like these. So that's a plus. I will commend the OP for taking the time and making it. And indeed, I do. I absolutely. Absolutely. So within this hive of scum and villainy, this wretched hive we discuss, there are highlights like this post here. But again, as mentioned, yeah, a lot of the stuff the devs do now are reactionary, which is a problem. The cartel, the companion system, the cartel slot machine. So yes, there are points to where, yes, they do listen to the player base, but it's such a reactionary and way they go about it. And then when they do react, as we have seen both with the companions and the cartel slot machine, they swing the pendulum too far one way or the other, which causes even more problems. So really, Bioware still has a lot of work to do on this front, the communication front and the actual implementation front of the game. It's I mean, we all want this game to be healthy. At the end of the day, we all want this game to be healthy. We all want to have a good, rewarding experience playing this game, and hence why we are where we are at with the forums. Hence why this show has come into being. Is to try to improve the experience both in and out of the game that we have with Star Wars. I mean, this is Star Wars after all. This is the year of Star Wars. Heck, I mean, this is going to be, the next 10 years are going to be the decade of Star Wars, really. I mean, unlike any other decade since 1977. I mean, when you think about it. So we want this game to succeed. We want this game to be good. But as we keep on saying, as we keep beating that dead bantha, BioWare has to make sure things are implemented, tested, and vetted properly. Essentially, we have to have, as players, options to be able to play this game in the manner that we most enjoy and do get that rewarding gameplay experience out of. Ultimately, that's what's going to make this game succeed. And unfortunately, as we've said, with 4.0, they've really harmed the longevity of the game by forcing this very potentially large player base into one small funnel of a gameplay style. And that, regardless of the game, regardless of the IP, regardless of the developers, doing that method of development is very harmful to a game. Unless there is a very specific niche audience this game, I should say, is trying to appeal to. Obviously, the Old Republic is not a niche game. Therefore, you cannot develop in a niche style of development and gameplay experiences, which BioWare has done here. And so, hence, why this stuff needs to be discussed, and why it really needs to be discussed ad nauseum. We're beating our heads against a brick wall. Well, we've got to beat that brick wall that's been erected around the devs' line of thinking. We've got to break it down and show them that, yes, we all want this game to succeed. We want this game to be the best game out there on the market. We want this game to continue to be number two in player base and subscriber numbers, behind the 800-pound gorilla. At which point it was. It no longer is that, unfortunately. It can be that again. I mean, it can survive. It can never overtake WoW. WoW can only self-implode. But when that does happen, why shouldn't Star Wars: The Old Republic be there to take the throne? And that's only going to happen if we continue to talk about these issues and continue to talk about them in a way that tells BioWare it needs to be improved. That's the only way this game will survive and be the best gameplay and offer the best gameplay experience that it can. Hopefully, BioWare will see that and understand that, and continue to make improvements in the game that goes in line with that direction that we all wanted to see it go. But that's it for this week. Tune in next week, as I'm sure as I peruse the forums and find more things to engage the community about. We'll see what happens. Anyway, this is Darth Oblivious saying thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you in game. And as always, may the Force be with you.